All right. Thanks, Judge Conmy, for meeting with me today. As you remember, I was your law clerk from 1991 to 1993. Yes. And I was appointed as to the Eighth Circuit Historical Committee by Dewey Kautzman, Magistrate Dewey Kautzman, who I also worked for. And as part of my membership of that committee, I was assigned this project to do an oral history of you. So thank you very much for agreeing to do this, and thanks to your staff for allowing you to be here. I just wanted to go into some of the background of your whole career. I want to touch before you were a judge, a little bit after you were a judge, depending on how much time we have. So I just wanted to start on your early life, your education, high school.
Oh, goodness. Okay.
Where did you go? Where did you go to high school?
Actually, it's now Shanley High School. We were the first class to graduate from Shanley. Before that, it had been Sacred Heart Academy in Fargo.
Oh, okay. And what made you decide to go to Harvard then?
A scholarship.
Oh.
I, in my naivety, applied only to one school, to Harvard, and was awarded a, quote, national scholarship, close quote, which I didn't think was any big deal. I mean, whatever. And then when I got there and discovered that basically some of those who were in competition for that same type of scholarship and hadn't gotten it, I was probably not qualified to carry their books, but it just turned out that being from North Dakota was a great help.
Yeah. What did you study at Harvard?
Actually, I like to call it philosophy. I think it was government is how it was labeled.
And did you get into singing at Harvard, or were you at Shanley too? How did you come to be interested in enjoy singing?
Well, that started kind of way back. One of my fond memories was singing a duet when I was, a freshman or sophomore in college with a young lady who was a foot taller than I was. And we turned it into a comedy act, and she put her elbow on top of my head as Indian Love Call. Believe me, it's still with me.
Oh, really? Oh my gosh. Well, then what made you be interested, what in your background made you be interested in law? I mean, what drew you to the law then after your philosophy and at Harvard?
My grandfather, Edward Walsh Conmy, got thrown out of the seminary in Ireland for conduct not becoming the priesthood. And that was never discussed as to just what that might have been. But my father was the youngest of 11 children, so I think we may have a hint about proclivities even back then. And he went to law school in this country after his uncle, the bishop, got him out of Ireland. Maybe it was self-defense, I don't know. But he ended up county judge in Pembina County. And then his children, there were 3 of the 11, at least 3, who went into law. The partnership in Fargo for years was Conmy, and Conmy, which was Dad's oldest brother, Ed, himself, and then Ed's oldest son, Tom.
Okay.
And then he moved out to Bismarck in '53. But so there's
while you were in college.
Yeah.
Right.
Yes.
All right.
Yes. Have to think back to the dates.
So what did you do after you graduated college?
Went to Georgetown, went to work for the federal government under a program called the Junior Management Assistant Program. And it was one where they recruited people they wanted to recruit to come to work in Washington, in a sense rotated through almost every bureau in a federal agency. Okay. And it was, I think, a grooming process to have you continue to be employed in those agencies. I went to work for the Labor Department in that program, and then enrolled in Georgetown Law School. Late afternoon classes, please, not night school.
Not
late
late
afternoon classes.
And you had your family with you there at Georgetown then?
Yes.
And who was in your family at that point?
Well, the twins, Pat and Mike, and then two more were born in D.C. while I was in law school and working for the Labor Department, and then two more got born here in Bismarck.
Ah, so when did you move back to Bismarck?
1959, I think.
All right. And
That would be when I got admitted to the bar here. I was admitted to the bar in Virginia, I think, in 1958, which kind of bummed out my coffee buddies at Georgetown. We all went down and took the Virginia bar exam before graduation.
Really?
And unfortunately, I had to tell them that I had passed, and they hadn't, and whatever. They got over it in a hurry.
Oh, where did you work then when you got back to Bismarck?
With my father.
Yeah.
It was Conmy, Donahue, and Conmy. Actually, he was the only one who'd give me a job. I had an older brother, Mike, who had graduated from medical school the same year I graduated from Georgetown. Oh. And he had offers that made me wonder if they were made to someone with my background, it would be hiring me to assassinate someone. I mean, there was quite a distinction, quite a difference.
Well, so what kind of law did you practice then in Bismarck in your early career?
Anything that came through the door. I think we all did, got pushed into a trial practice very quickly. JFX had a number of insurance company defense clients, and pretty soon I was trying those cases instead of him, sometimes to the dismay of the client who hadn't realized I would be the one trying the case. But,
did you enjoy that type of work?
Very much, very much.
And what made you interested in politics? Because you at some point went to the Bismarck City Commission.
Yes, it's an excellent question in a sense. I'm not sure what got me started there, other than interest in city government and appearing before the city commission representing people with either developments that needed approval or some engineering problem on something that had already been done. Yeah.
How many years were you on city commission?
8. Everything I did seemed to be in 8-year periods.
Oh, right. Well, then you was that a jumping off point then for your time in the legislature?
Yes, I was still on the commission when got elected to the legislature. Yes, they ended.
Yeah, and you were in the North Dakota legislature for 8 years then too.
Actually, 10. I think I was 5 terms.
And what district were you in?
47 then.
Oh, right, 47. Still Bismarck district.
A good, safe Republican district.
It still is.
Well, it was until there was a claim that my running mate, Vern Wagner, as head of the Appropriations Committee, had taken some action that was not in the best interests of state employees in terms of a pay raise. So he lost that last election to the only Democrat that I think District 47 ever elected. I'm not sure. The history of that is fascinating because for a long time they all ran at large in a big glob.
Yeah.
Like 4 or 5 districts. So on the ballot would be 10 members of the House, for example, and it was a large area, and it wasn't till later that it became separated into specific districts. So,
I didn't know that about Vern either. So were you still in the legislature when, we'll talk about what influenced you to be interested in becoming a judge?
There's one primary interest which people might think is crass, but it was really enjoyable to get a paycheck without having to put the money in the bank first in order to write the check to yourself out of the bank. And I was a terrible biller. I didn't keep track of time. I didn't have a mean, nasty secretary to keep me in line and keep records like I should have had for billing purposes. So getting the paycheck first was a definite inducement.
So what was your first step then when you thought that you might be interested? Who did you talk to first?
I drove to Mapleton and spoke to Mark Andrews.
Senator?
Yes.
Mark Andrews.
Yeah.
And what did he have to tell you?
He was interested, I guess you could say. I'm not sure. I don't really remember who the competition was or if there was much. At that point, I had been president of the Bar Association. I'd been on the Bismarck City Commission. I had 5 terms in the legislature. And I guess organized as a Republican in the legislature, though Earl Strinden once said to me, I lied for you. And I said, what was that? Oh, he said, I had an inquiry, and they wanted to know if you were a Republican. And he said, I scratched my head and decided I could lie a little bit for you. So I said, yes, you were.
Well, thank you, Earl Strinden. Yeah. So then tell me about the nomination process. You met with Senator Andrews. You were interested. I think Judge Van Sickle was going on senior status, right?
Yes. Both of them. Both Judge Van Sickle and Fargo Court.
Oh, Judge Benson.
Benson, they went senior status at the same time. So I got appointed and walked in, and I was the only theoretically active judge. And both of them had toiled long and hard and were looking forward to getting out of that position. So they both vanished, as I recall, for a brief period of time. And there I was. Oh, and the very first hearing was on the coal gasification plant. And
nice and controversial.
Some tremendous problem. I'm not positive exactly what it was. But I walked into the courtroom with Alice Seneschal as my helper, my clerk, and looked out, and there were 2 guys in there wearing turbans, and there were like 15 people in there. And I thought, what in the hell have I gotten myself into? But that was my introduction.
How did that work out then? It all worked out, though.
Well, I don't know. We're all still alive, put it that way.
Who helped you get started in the federal court here when you first started?
Judge Van Sickle.
Yeah, and his staff.
Well, Helen straightened me out on a number of things very quickly, yes.
Yeah. What kind of things did she straighten you out on?
Where I asked Judge Van Sickle for assistance on several motions that were pending, and she brought them back and said he wasn't interested. And I know he never even found out about them, but so be
not.
it. Yes.
Yeah. Well, you adjudicated, I got some statistics from the court, 3,385 defendants. Do any of them stand out to you in particular?
Yes, I discovered that I had a psychological problem with defendants charged with physical abuse of children or infants. I absolutely was no longer a dispassionate trier of fact. I just wish on a couple of them that the Bureau of Prisons had a location in Greenland or somewhere where they could stake the defendant out in a field for the winter. Yeah, some of them were tough because of that reaction. Others were tough because of the brutality. The big thing, North Dakota is different from virtually every other state in that the federal court in North Dakota has jurisdiction over felony criminal cases occurring on the reservation. So most federal courts don't have state law criminal procedure. They have federal law violations only. And so our dockets here were much like a state court judge on the criminal law side. And when we have the large Indian population and the reservations, that was quite a pool of possible candidates for action.
Yeah, there's been a lot of change, though. While you were a judge in 1985, you were appointed, correct?
Yes.
85.
December of 85.
And then you through what kind of technological changes? I mean, have you seen, and did you have to deal with?
Well, of course, the cameras, the recording, but basically most of it stayed the same. The court reporter and the typed printed transcripts. I mean, that didn't change much.
How about the use of computers?
Oh boy, yeah. Curse of my existence. I got very proficient at writing on the computer. We got along just fine. You get past that and you want to do research or something. That's why I had you guys. That was the beauty of the young law clerks coming in fresh out of law school, super skilled with the computers and word processing and researching, and I could sit back and wait for the product.
Right, pop out. Yeah. Well, what about, do you have any rulings that stand out to you, like on the civil side? Any really important cases that you remember working on?
Well, there's one major disaster, of course, to me. Got a 56-page opinion back from the Eighth Circuit reversing me, and I must confess, I never read the opinion.
Oh, well, good. Yeah, nobody likes to do that. Well, do you have a favorite case or anything of that nature?
I don't think so. They were all fascinating in their own way. One murder case sticks in my mind because it's one in which the prosecuting U.S. Attorney, Dave Peterson, reached a plea agreement on the morning of starting of the trial with a jury sitting in the box, where the defendant agreed to plead guilty to first-degree murder and be given a sentence of 35 years. I didn't think anything of it, and we went in, and he pled guilty, and I sentenced him to 35 years, and then later he had second thoughts. And so he had his new counsel file an appeal with the Eighth Circuit, and the Eighth Circuit came back and said, yes, it all had to start over because you could not have a 35-year sentence and a first-degree murder conviction. They didn't go together. So we tried it a second time, and the jury convicted a second time, and this time, without a plea agreement to guide me, I followed the law and sentenced him to life without parole.
Yeah.
And so he really accomplished a lot, but
Yeah, it really worked out well for him.
yeah.
Do you feel like you brought a special judicial philosophy to the bench, different than other people, the same?
I think service in the legislature, where your role, particularly if by training and experience you have expertise that the local wonderful citizen elected from his home county, who was a farmer all his life, but a wonderful person and well known in the community and accepted for his honesty and wisdom maybe, but they needed occasionally assistance and guidance from someone they had met and knew, and that basically turned out to be me frequently. And your role in the legislature was, if there was a problem, recognize the problem, analyze the solutions, and if the solution proposed was worse than the problem, vote against the bill. If the solution was tenable and would work, fine. And it didn't make any difference what political party may have been interested in it, because most of the things we ran into in the legislature was East versus West, Fargo versus Dickinson, as it were. And that was the real division. But the legislature was problem solving. And in a sense, that transferred over to the judiciary. Problem solving, although with
more rigid, yes,
rules, because you weren't creating the law, you were theoretically
interpreting,
supposed to be applying the law.
Well, did you miss the legislature at all, being involved in the legislature?
In a sense, yes. I did not miss the economic disaster it was.
Yeah.
That gets interesting. I was, president of the Bar Association before I got elected to the legislature. So in that capacity, I was the head lobbyist for the Bar Association for the session prior to joining the legislature. And these positions were not conducive to great wealth.
No.
Mm-hmm.
So, you talked about, becoming a judge and being in the legislature, being involved in the bar. Mm-hmm. There's a certain loneliness that we hear about that judges have, because you're isolated from attorneys. You have to kind of step back from those friendships. How did you deal with that when you were a judge?
It's a very real thing. All of a sudden, you're no longer the person you were before. Now you're this strange animal who sits up in front. And it was difficult. It focuses you much closer onto your family.
Which is a good thing.
Well, it all depends. The family might not always agree.
Well, I remember you had a group of friends that you got together with on a regular basis.
Yeah.
For coffee and cards, and that helped you.
Very much. Vern Wagner, Denny Boyd, and I.
Yeah.
In fact, we played gin rummy in my office a couple of times.
I think I remember that.
Yeah.
Yeah. let's talk a little bit about Ardell. You know, I got to know you when Ardell first came to work for you. We worked together for a couple of years, and then Ardell wrote that nice book about you, and I dug that out to do some research.
Your focus is a little narrow when you say that book was about me.
Well, I know. That's the only chapter I read, though. Tell me a little bit about your friendship with Ardell.
Oh, it goes way back. He was the quintessential Democrat. And Herb Nodland was a law partner. Herb Nodland was a Democrat. Herb Nodland's wife was a very active Democrat who actually ran against me in one of the House races. And I'm ashamed of my own arrogance in a sense, in that I sat at their dining room table and helped her stuff envelopes that she was mailing out in support of her candidacy.
Against you.
And looking back at that, I think, you were bad taste, man.
And so Ardell came to work for you, and do you feel like he was a good balance to
Well,
you?
he was in the firm first, my former law firm, and had a point of view that was not always the same as mine. Then when illness struck and he became basically disabled for competitive law practice and was available, I was delighted to hire him. Fine mind and different outlook on some things, a different perspective, and it balanced things out very nicely, I thought.
Oh, yeah, I agree.
And he was a joy.
Yeah. Do you have any anecdotes that you'd like to share? We were visiting ahead of time about Ardell or any of your other law clerks.
Well,
any that are in the room, or me, or...
There's one law clerk sitting right there. I'm trying to remember the defendant's name, and I can't. They blur together. But we were having a conference in Chambers, and sitting around the table, the defendant, one of the bailiffs or marshals, I'm not sure which, Ardell in his wheelchair, me, Al Emineth, the court reporter, and something was not going to the likes of the defendant, who jumped out of his chair and was threatening someone. I don't know who he was going to go after, but the law clerk, who is sitting right here, popped out of her chair and ran around and hid behind Ardell in his wheelchair. And I thought that was just a neat touch somehow.
I was trying to pull him away, Judge
Oh,
Conmy.
okay, yes.
Well, how would you like to be remembered? You know, when you're that's kind of a heavy question, but is there something that you brought to the federal court that you'd like people to remember you for?
I was chairman of one of the Judicial Council's subcommittees, and I really enjoyed the legislature and legislative training that gave me to run committee meetings. And this was a committee that attempted to determine the need for additional judgeships in all the various places. And it was absolutely fascinating because it got us into the statistics that these things were based on, the validity of those statistics, whether or not they were comparable. And it was just a fascinating exercise working with the personnel of Washington. And I enjoyed that very much.
What was the result of that committee then? What came out of that?
Recommendations to the Judicial Resources Committee to go forward to legislative action on new judgeships in various jurisdictions. And it was so interesting because it was apples and oranges. I never realized this, but the judges came out of state court systems.
Right.
Every state court's procedures and policies and politics were different. Sometimes they were just impossible to reconcile,
Right.
but here we all are. Now we're, quote, the same court, but we were so different in terms of procedures, of handling cases, of scheduling. The state court practices followed the judges in many ways. We were lucky in North Dakota because North Dakota's practice tracked very closely with the
Right.
federal, with the rules of civil procedure
Exactly.
and all those things which the state had adopted. Some states hadn't, and it was wonderful. Magistrates, for example.
Right.
Some states used magistrates literally as a surrogate district court
Right.
judge, as an Article III judge. And cases came in, and the magistrate got assigned block of cases and heard them and decided them, and there was a right of appeal to the district court, but basically in those districts, the lawyers soon learned that magistrate wasn't going to be turned over unless it was for a very good reason. So their magistrates were in addition to the district court judges. Other districts didn't use magistrates for anything, and they were then handicapped by the absence of, and it was just fascinating working with this group, and the politics involved were,
You were
but
good
you
at
had to
that.
analyze it in a
Right.
sense.
So did your work from that committee then standardize the procedures across all districts more?
Couldn't do it. There was no way you could
No.
ever accomplish that. They had their ways, and they were going to follow them, and they were as good as your ways, probably, maybe better, but they were different.
Well, we changed here in our district when we just had part-time magistrates, and then we went to full-time.
Yes.
And so, and you were here during that.
Yes.
How did you feel about that?
Very grateful
Yeah.
for it, because it gave another mind to do a great deal of preliminary screening, and in certain cases when we finally got people educated where they would consent to the magistrate trying the case.
Right.
Not very many did, but
In the
but
beginning.
some did, and that relieved some of the pressure. Moved a little bit in the direction of the primarily western states that used the magistrates as a full-time judge.
Right. Well, we're having this interview in the conference room in the visiting judges' chambers, but it was your chambers before you fully retired.
Yes.
And so what we thought we might do is do a little bit of walking tour, and you could talk about some of the pieces of art that you have here.
The place was virginal when we moved in, so we had the opportunity to put things on the walls. For example, an original Xavier Cugat that I got given by a doctor client whom I represented in a medical malpractice case, and the result was successful. So he rewarded me, even though I was working basically for his insurance company, of course. This one, called The Objection, and I love the looks on the people's faces of either surprise or horror, wondering what's going on. Then we have some very welcome documents when received. Ronald Reagan's appointment of me, which is really kind of nice. That during the time of my tenure as a city commissioner, I was police and fire commissioners, and it was a bicentennial, I think, celebration.
And I ended up being posed as police commissioner, looking bearded and otherwise wonderfully disreputable. Dewey Kautzman was charged with basically designing this set of offices. He was the, at that time, full-time magistrate. And he ordered this carpet without any prior knowledge or approval of the procurement people, who simply thought it was, well, you know, you got to have carpet. And then when they got the bill, they were horrified, but there was nothing they could do because it was a custom thing. And I think it's just beautiful. And Dewey and his visitors and I and my visitors have spent our days walking around it so as not to step on it. These are beautiful offices that were built.
You mentioned that you're watched closely by your caregivers or your ladies, and tell us a little bit about your wife Jo.
Josephine Lydia Keller Conmy. We were married after 2 years. I had been to Harvard for 2 years. We were married the fall of my junior year. I was 19, she was 20, and we moved from Fargo-Moorhead to Cambridge into a one room and kitchen with a bath down the hall that we shared with three old ladies who had this habit of sprinkling Bon Ami everywhere, including in the bathtub whenever. It was rather rudimentary, but those were very, very good years.
Very good
Just
years.
delightful.
How long have you been married?
Oh, I think it's 66 years now.
Oh, very good.
Yeah.
Oh, and we're very grateful that she agreed to come and help you be at this interview too. Do you have any advice for future? I'll open it up. Future lawyers and or future judges.
I guess that advice would be that they shouldn't take themselves too seriously. That it's easy to become focused on the real power of the position so that unconsciously it gets abused. And smart thing is relax, don't take yourself seriously, and trust the good people you're surrounded with in the support staff, because without them you might as well be staked out in the blizzard along with my favorite criminal defendant. No, that just don't relax.
No.
And know that no matter what you do, someone's going to hate you, and that you will be labeled crazy and incompetent, and sometimes you wonder if maybe the criticism is accurate, but you hope not too often.
Well, thank you very much. You've
You're
had a
very
wonderful
welcome.
career. Thank you.